What is going on, everyone? Gonna give it a minute or two, have everyone pile on in, and we'll get started with some basics of web development. Okay, we got some people coming in. Hello, hello. What's going on, everyone? Thanks for joining us. Here, let's get this show on the road. What's up, everyone? I'm Zane, coach here at MLH. We are going to talk today about intro to front-end web development. So pretty exciting stuff. With that, how many of you guys have done web development? Hello, hello. Thank you for the hellos, everyone. How many of you guys have done front-end web development before? Is it a new thing for you, or is it your area of expertise? Have you dabbled in it a bit? You like front-end web development. You don't love it, just like it. It's fun. I have fun with it. I've learned it. It's kind of been my focus for quite a bit now. Learning Next.js, nice. We're going to be talking a little bit about JavaScript frameworks and solutions and tools and all that. Okay, nice, Giddy. So you've done a bit of front-end web development. Well, hopefully you can learn all the more in our talk today. I am going to just get my notes. One thing I wanted to change on it, but with that. But yeah, so we're primarily going to be looking at the basics of like JavaScript and CSS. So first, it's going to be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Also be talking a little bit on like open source solutions and possibilities in web development, as we are, of course, in open source month and territory, with this being MLH, Tech Week open source after all. So with that, well, get started in just a second. But yeah, it should be pretty fun. We'll go through like how to build a very, very basic website in terms of, I guess, just kind of all the considerations and tools and tech that goes into that. We got Gubrick. No, some HTML and some CSS. Yes, CSS is like deceptively important. Like you think, oh, it's just making things look nice or making them look, presentable or digestible, but it's really the key to modern responsive websites at the end of the day. So super, super important. In fact, there's quite a few good resources on learning CSS that we'll hopefully go over today. So with all that being said and done, let's jump into some coding and some aspects of front-end web development. So what I first want to show everyone, I first want to delve into is just what goes into a web page. So let's see if I can share my screen here. Okay, let's get this on the screen. Okay, so you can see I have a web page open. This is actually the page for the event that we are partaking in right now, getting started with front-end web development. If y'all have not registered, I recommend that now. But we can see just a normal web page. Nothing too crazy. But what I want to go over is what exactly creates and makes up this web page? What are the tools? What are the technologies at play? So with any web page, we can see that we have the content of the page, like we have the images, we have the text, we have it's kind of it really in terms of your pure content. We also have the styling of the page in terms of the colors, how content is placed, how it's all stylized. Let me show you something to just really drive that home. So I'm going to take away the styling of the page where we have just the essential elements, just the essential content. Look at that. Oops. Whoa, what did that happen? Here we go. Look at that. Not as nice to browse. All the content is there, but it's not very professional looking. It's not very sleek or digestible or anything of the sort. Very disorienting if you were to load this page and this was what you saw. So it's not just the content that's important, it's how you present the content as well. And two, I mean, imagine that we come on here and we try to click the button to register, or we wanted to submit our registration questions and pretend it just didn't work, pretend it just didn't, the button just did nothing. The functionality is also important as well. So it's not just the content on the page, it's not just how it looks, and it's not just about how things function. It's how do all three of them come together to create a consistent overall experience. So with that, we have in play 3 different technologies. Exactly, content, presentation, function. That's kind of the main thing that we want to really drive home here. They're all ultimately contribute to one overall goal, right? The web page as we want to experience it. But typically there's 3 independent technologies. Well, I say independent, they're independent in essence, but ultimately they all come together to contribute to the same overall goal, putting together your web page. These technologies are, and tools, solutions, however you want to call them, are HTML, CSS, JavaScript. HTML is for content. CSS is for styling and presentation. And JavaScript is for functionality. Tiny bit of an oversimplification, but that's the main insight to take away. So, natural place to start is with basics of HTML. So we'll definitely go over that in just a moment here. But, well, yeah, I think we can jump in. I think we can jump right into HTML. So let's appreciate HTML. So this is a page where you can say we essentially just have HTML at the forefront. Now, of course, it's not styled in a way that makes the page presentable, but it does have all the necessary information and such that we need, which is definitely a huge plus. If we don't have the content that we need to communicate to the user, well then, we kind of don't really have a web page of much use or much interest. So first and foremost, we do need the content. We do need what the page is going to be composed of. That's where HTML comes in. We say functionality first. Without the walls, you can't decorate it or install water and electricity. Oh, I can definitely see that. And 2, yeah, like we have, like HTML will have some, I guess it depends on your definition of functionality. You'll kind of see how they all relate together in the end. Like HTML technically has some functionality within it, you could say. So does CSS, but I mean, we'll see how it all works out. Hello, thanks for joining us. So with this being established, let's dive into our code. So I'm going to show you all how to create some basic HTML and what exactly that means, like what exactly HTML is. Oh, I can't just share. That's peculiar. Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. There we go. Exactly. Yeah. So HTML actually gives the structure. You'll see. It's pretty interesting. So with that, let's go ahead and do some code. So I have a new folder that I created on my computer where we're going to house the basics of just the basic files for developing a simple front-end website. Going to go to new file, and we're going to make an HTML file. Now this file could be called anything, but we're going to call it a index.html. You'll see the name index.html. Oh, hold on. Let's just do this. Here we go. Okay. You'll see the index.html very, very often. That's typically like the main page of your website, your home page, so on and so forth. Again, it could technically be called anything, but index.html is very common, and there's certain technologies, tools that expect index.html to be your homepage name. So we'll go with that. So with HTML, in fact, let's do here. Let's go to HTML. Perfect. So at the most absolute base of HTML, we can utilize images or text. So just say this is example text, and we can launch our website, and we should see it in a moment, at least if it wants to. There we go. Let me put this up now. To have that in place. Oh, that'd be so helpful if I could. Ooh, can I do that? Hold on, let me see. Oh no, I can't do 2 live windows. That's too sad. But we'll do here. So I have my basic code. We can look at the code actually. Let me just do the browser because that'd actually be pretty helpful. Here. I have this open. Let's do this. So we have our basic web page here, right? So you guys saw that I had, you want to delve into my website and see what's going on with it. Here we go. Okay, so if you want to see the basic website, what's going on with it, this is the HTML code here. I just had it where it just said this is example text. HTML added some, like I think the browser added some additional things like some of this HTML element, head element, body element. We'll kind of get to that in a moment. But ultimately, I added just some text. And it's displaying it. As you can see, this is my web page here. So I can just go on to add more text. I can say this is example text. Add another, I can just say I'm adding more text. I'm actually altering the code in the browser. If you are not aware already, browsers like Chrome, Firefox, here I'm using the Brave browser. They often have what's called development tools or like browser dev tools. At least on Chrome and on Brave, you can press F12 and it'll pull up this, it'll pull up the dev tools as you see them here. Lots of different things that you can do with them. Lots of different tools. But here I'm just looking at the code structure of the web page. Like this is how it appears essentially in my code editor. So what's nice too is that I can edit the website as it's live. So if I want to test some changes, like, okay, what if I want to add more text as I did before? It'll make these changes in the browser, but they will not be reflected in the actual HTML file. I'm not writing to the HTML file. I'm just altering the files as it's being presented in the web browser. So we have that. So you can see that right, I do have that web page that boots up from making these changes. Now let's go back into the code editor. I want to do a few other things. Expand a little bit on what's possible with HTML and best practice with it. So whenever you are, so here it is. We just have this as example text. So I can go on, this is additional text. Or let's say I'm making a web page. Let's say I'm doing Zane's blog. Hello everyone, welcome to my blog. Say article 1, article title. Let's say this is an article. My amazing stream. Hello everyone. This is my amazing stream. Very, very modest, I am. But here, there's kind of an issue with this. Here I have the main title of the stream, or the main title of the web page, and then here's like a subtitle to it. Here's the title of my first article on the page, and then here's the first, paragraph in my article, and then I can go on and add more stuff. But there's kind of an issue in that the web browser doesn't really understand. There's no context that I've given the web browser to understand like which is serving as the title, which is serving as being within the article, which is serving as the content of the article itself. There's no context given to the web browser to understand what content is what. This is important for quite a few reasons. One of the most basic, there's quite a few reasons as to why we want to make these content distinctions. One of them is that it makes styling of the web page a lot more straightforward and in control and systematized later on once we start looking at CSS. But there's also other things as well, like if Google is going to, like for search engines, if they're going to go through a web page and snag the info from it so that they can showcase the web page on their search results, they need to make sure, they need to be able to figure out which content is, for example, the title of the page, which is the subtitle, so on and so forth. So being able to give proper context to the content on your web page is super, super important. And that's a big aspect of HTML as well. It's like the text content and it's the images and all of that, but it's also the context to that content. So with that, you're never really going to see anyone write HTML just like this. Instead, what we do is we're going to use HTML elements. Elements are what gives us our context to the content on the page. So here I have my H1. This is my main header. So this is like the main title of your page, you can imagine. Like in a book, you have a chapter title. This is the main title of your page. Again, this is important because one of the reasons is that, again, like say search engines will use this to display at least they can, or in different circumstances, the title of your page. They'll know exactly what the title of your page is as opposed to any other content on your page. Or the same thing with the browser. There's just these different tools, different systems that need to understand the context to one thing versus another. So if I wanted to do, similar to what I just did, if I wanted to contextualize what we had before, I'd say that, and then I would have a subtitle. So you have your different headers. These are like the different H1, H2, H3, H4. I think it goes all the way up to H6, either H5 or H6. And these are just different titles within your page. Like they're different blocks of contents. So on my H1, I have that. With my H2, I could say, welcome to my amazing blog. Then if I wanted to do say I want to do like an opening paragraph for my website, I could say, I really appreciate you all coming to the blog. And please enjoy your stay, something like that. You can see that I use a paragraph tag, these P tags. Again, this is for paragraph-esque content, to put it simply. So like non-hierarchical text content, I guess you could say, or yeah, I guess that kind of gets the message across. So here, looks like you guys are talking in the chat. Let me keep up. So how did I switch off the CSS in Yes? So just very quickly, let me show you in the browser. I actually just searched that up shortly before the stream, funnily enough. I knew it was possible, but I was wondering what the fastest, most efficient way to do that would be. I just took this. Let's see, is it in the console? Console. Oh, weird. Oh, here, if I just go up, here we go. I use this code. document head, parent node, dot remove child, document head. So basically that's going to, just a really quick explanation of that. Can I access the document head in the, no, I guess not. Basically it just removes the calling of the script for the HTML. So this is just a solution that I found online to really quickly do that. But I mean, there's a few other ways you could do it too. Like you could ultimately, as long as you cut off the source from the CSS file to the HTML file, it'll do that. This all makes sense once we talk a little bit more about CSS for those of you who aren't as familiar with front-end web development. Let's see. Okay, lots of philosophical talk on of decorating and structure. Very nice, very nice. Oh, the screen wasn't showing? Here. Sorry about that. Here. So basically, I have this, I just found this code here. Document.head.parentNode.removeChild, document.head. Again, as long as you like sever the connection between the CSS file and the HTML file, then that will get rid of your CSS. I mean, you can also style CSS directly in the HTML file, but we will get to that shortly. So yeah, sorry about that. There's a lot of, I have to do a lot of jumping around, sharing the separate screens. So I missed the step there for a second. Let's go back to the code. Okay, so with this, so I'm giving context to this HTML content. And with that, it's just going to build my page up to be more contextual. So again, we talked about this helps with social media engines. This helps with the browser in determining certain things. It's also helpful too for like screen readers and accessibility devices, where if someone is using a screen reader to go through the page, they kind of need to know like, you know, which is like what part of the content is the title of the page, where, you know, which is like one article that they can read, another article that they can read, another article that they can read. It's very, very important stuff. So that's kind of the basis of HTML in terms of how it works in theory. Now, there's all sorts of HTML tags that give all sorts of different contexts and all sorts of different just ways of organizing your contents. There's a few other things that we can do. Let's go into, so usually there's like HTML boilerplate that you use. So boilerplate is just like kind of pre-written code that'll get you started. For a successful HTML document, for a practical one, usually we need code along sort of in line with this here. The important things to know here, well, you kind of need all of these, but I won't go into discussion on all of them. You can go online and you can search up like a HTML boilerplate or two. You saw how in my code editor, I just type HTML because I have Emmet installed in my code editor, which just gives me like just has a lot of code templates and coding like solution, autofill, all that sort of stuff. I use this here, it gives me this to work with. The head of an HTML page is mainly like metadata and kind of data beyond the main content of the page. So here you can see like there's the page title. This will be the title that appears in like the page tab on your browser. So if I change this to title, Zane's blog title, update that, and then I go to the browser, you'll see that it'll have changed. So share screen, go to this here. All right, so you can see here, right on the browser tab, Zane's blog title. So that's like what your head is. What we were looking at, the sort of content that we were just going over before, would be like your body content, which is your main content that it's kind of like the what your users will actually kind of see and interact with, to put it simply. So too, if I wanted to put in here, I'd start with, my H1, like my main title, right? Zame's blog. My subtitle, I could say, thank you all for visiting my blog. You enjoy it. Now, too, if we go to look at the web page, you can see how those things are represented there. So let's go to here. So here you go. You can see there's my H1, there's my H2, here's my paragraph. And again, if we use the browser tools to investigate, we can see the code that, right, so we wrote that in the body, right? Because the body is like the non-metadata, you could say, to put it simply. There's my H1 that I wrote, here's my H2, here's my paragraph. There we go. So that's the basics of HTML. Again, there's lots to learn, but it's not too crazy to pick up, like in a very simple way like that. Just additional HTML tags that you want to learn to give additional context. But we'll get to those in a bit once we're going to learn a little bit about CSS and then a little bit about JavaScript. And then we're going to learn about the more practical applications of like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So for HTML, we'll go over like links and images, forums, stuff like that. So with that in place, let's talk a little bit about CSS. So even though I said we were going to, here, let me take a swig of my water. Oh no, this big water bottle that I love to. Oh, is it even being picked up on the camera? No, it's translucent, so it's made of glass. Oh, that's kind of creepy. It's kind of weird. Look at that. Anyways, I have a big bottle of water that I love drinking out of, so. Keeps me hydrated, lets me track my water throughout the day. Anyways, that's more of an aside. With that, however, we can see that even in the HTML here, the H1 is styled differently than the H2. The H2 is styled differently than the paragraph tag, than the P tag. So we didn't say anything about HTML dealing with styling. What exactly is going on here? Well, this is going to get us into our first bit of CSS. So CSS deals with the styling of things. So if I open up my browser tools, I can actually start to style things a little bit here. I can take my H1, for example, and I can say that I want to, there's attributes of every HTML element that you can style in particular. So like you can see here, once I start typing, they start coming up. So for example, I can change the font size. I can have that be, as big as I want it to be, really. I can change the color of it to whatever I want. I can change even the font. Let's see. So the styling, you have control over lots and lots of different things. But we can see that there's styling differences between these elements here, even though we haven't specified any yet in our HTML code. The reason for that is that the web browser automatically applies default stylings to HTML elements. And for particular elements, it has particular basic styles already in place. So my H1, for example, it's going to have, we can see here, it already has a font size set. It already has a font weight. So like it's bold right now. That's where that font weight bold comes in. So even though I haven't explicitly stated or placed any styles upon these different elements, the web browser is doing that automatically. Now, some people find this a bit annoying. They're not a really big fan of it, in that like they want full control over like every single element. They'd rather start from an initialized state from every individual element that way they don't have to fight the web browsers, or they don't have to like actively undo the web browser's default stylings. So there are solutions for that that have gotten like I use and that I've seen people use overall, called, basically the term that you want to search up is CSS reset, where overall it's basically just code that will undo a lot of these basic browser stylings. So that way, like once you apply it, your H1 will look exactly like your H2, and both of them will look exactly like your P tag. It just starts you off in a complete initialized state so that you have more control over more immediate control over what you want each element to look like. So we'll see how to apply that in a little bit. But just know that like if you're just working with HTML right out of the gate and you haven't done anything with like specifying a CSS reset or maybe even configuring your browsers to do that, you're going to have some default styling. You're going to have contrasting styling between different elements because of that. Now, however, as we've seen, we can specify styling ourselves as well for any particular element. So, for example, well, let's go back into the code. Let's add a little bit more content, and we'll see what exactly we can do, what exactly is possible. So we'll do share screen. And so with HTML, as I said, we've looked at the structure and the content of the page. Now we're going to look at the styling and the presentation of the page. We're going to be officially delving into CSS now. So with that, I'm going to add a few more paragraph tags just to make a point on something. So thank you for visiting my blog. Let me pull the code up too. So I made some additional paragraph tags. So thank you for visiting my blog. Let's say there's lots of articles. Your friends and family. Okay, so there's different, so you can see I have these different p tags here. Now, let's say that I want to begin styling. So there's a few different ways to style. The main way you're likely will see is people creating a dedicated CSS file. So you can name the file anything that you want. App.css is just a fairly common. You can see like app.css. You also see like style or styles.css. It really doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you have the file. Now I have a CSS file in here, but I need to link it to my HTML file so that the HTML intrinsically knows that it's where it has to pull styles from. So I'm going to do style. Am I brain farting? Style sheets. Oh, I always have it set up on my here we do link. There we go. Link CSS. Okay, there we go. I'm so used to my template that I use. Sometimes I have a little bit of a brain fart. So here we have to use this code link relation style sheet. So basically just telling the HTML file, hey, we're going to get you a style sheet file like our CSS file. And the name of that file is going to be, we're going to say app.css. Again, it can be anything, just has to point to the right place. So with that now, if I start writing CSS here, if I say for the H1 element right here, my main title, if I say I want the color to be red, then when we go to the web page for that, we should see that the title shall be red. And look at that. There we go. And again, you can see it reflected in the code. So here on my H1, if I click on it, you can see down here, H1 color red, and you can see that it comes from that app.css file. So yeah, it's shared on the screen. Let me know if you guys can see it. But yeah, so here we have that. H1, it's red. Okay, so with that, let's delve into a little bit more on just programming CSS and how we can make it work to more efficiently style our web page. So if I do share screen, once more, let's get back to the code. Okay, so I styled the H1 there. Now I can style all of my paragraph tags too with the same style as well. So say I did like paragraph tag and I wanted to say like color, we could make it, maybe we could make it green. When I refresh the web page, all of the text for all of these would be green. But let's say that I don't want all of them to be green. I just want a particular paragraph tag to be green, or do whatever sort of styling I want to it. Remember that, right? We use these HTML tags to give particular context to the content on the page. So all of these are perfectly valid as being paragraph tags. That is the correct context that they need. But if I only want one paragraph tag to be colored green, I'm gonna have to have a way to distinguish like either whichever one that I want to use. Let's do this first one. So if I want to have specific stylings for that one in particular, in fact, let's do this. We'll keep them all green, but I want just that first one to have like, say, let's make it bold. If I just want a contrasting style for that in particular, if I want to be able to target specific elements, then I'm going to have a unique solution for that. And this is where what we call CSS classes typically come in. So if I go onto my HTML element and I type class, and I give a class name, so this is kind of like a nickname for the element to be able to refer to it. If I say, I don't know, what do we want to call this? Like, let's say main message. What I can do is I can go, okay, well, now this paragraph tag has a unique identifier, main message, which I can now, in CSS, if I add the dot at the beginning and the class name, it knows that I'm targeting a class if I use the dot. If I don't use the dot or don't do anything, if I just use the element name, it's going to target elements of that kind. But if I use the dots, it specifies that I'm targeting a class. I can target that class, and I said we could, hold on, target CSS. Yeah. I want font style to be bold, and we could like make the text size a little bit larger too. 16 pixels. We could do like maybe 25 pixels. So I can use this, and now this "thank you for visiting my blog" paragraph tag will have a unique styling compared to these other paragraph elements. And you can use this main message. You can use a class on any element that you want. You can recycle the same class on multiple things, as we'll see in a moment. But let's see the results of this. So if I go to here. So now you can see, here's my code, right? My H1, blah, blah. Here's these different paragraph tags, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see right here too, 1, 2, 3, 4. But this one with the main message class is getting this unique styling, right? With the green text and the larger font size, because that's the styling that we, here. We can talk about this too. Wait, really? Interesting. Anyways, we'll get back to that. But anywho, right, we see at least this green text in the larger font size. Larger font size coming from that main message class specifically. Or two, I could also change the color of the text to that main message class also, adding additional attributes to this class, additional stylings and such. So again, this becomes particularly important when you're doing very particular styling for a specific web page. We'll come to see how useful this sort of thing is in due time. So let's go ahead and utilize that CSS reset, actually. Can I just, no, here we can do, so if I put this in the code, so let's go and go back into VS Code where we're writing the code. We put this at the top. Now if we go, remember this is gonna like reset the styles for basically everything, except for the styles that we added here. These will be preserved because they come after this. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, everything else will be, well, here, let's comment this out. So these are the unique styles that we added. We're going to disable them for a moment. We'll see that everything should basically have the same styling on the page. Here we go. Okay, so we had that. Now if we go here, right, everything has the same styling. It's all homogenized because we added that CSS reset. So now I could do more specific styling for any particular thing. So for my H1 in particular, I can style my H1 to be exactly what I want it to look like for my title, right? I could say font size, like, 50 pixels. I could say font style, bold and bold. Oh, font weight bold, it should be, not font style. There we go. I could say, font family, I could set a particular font for the title too. Right, and then, so we talked a little bit about the CSS reset before, how the browser applies styles. Just kind of a little detour on that again. But yeah, so there's CSS in terms of how we style things on the page, and we can use classes, as we saw, to target specific elements for styling. Now with that, there's still a few other things about CSS to know that really affects how you can utilize it. So let's go back into the code again. So let's get rid of the CSS reset. You kind of get the point of it. Let's do this. Let's do this. I'm going to style the H1. So again, this like Zane's blog, the main title of the page. I'm gonna give it the color red. I'm gonna give it the color green. So I have two conflicting styles instructions here, right? I'm saying make it red, and I'm saying make it green. So what is it going to do? Let's take a look. Let's see what happens. We are going to see that ultimately, it comes out as being green. So let's look at the code real quick. So we can see here that in the browser DevTools, which allows us another look into the code, we specified it as being red at first. Then we specified it as being green. Now, this is one of the features, one of the marvels of CSS, is that it can ultimately resolve conflicting styles. And there's a logic to this that's very, very important to learn in order to ultimately have control over CSS. What can we dive in from there? Well, let's talk about why this worked exactly. Like, why did it choose green over red? So let's go back to the code. We can see the first reason as to why. I had a sneeze fake me out. Anyways, so basic rule of CSS is that there's a little bit more to this, but for right now, the code that takes place further on down in the file, that's further in the file, will take precedence, all other things being equal. So we see that we say that we want the style to be red up here, but then we say down here we want the style to be green. This is further down in the file, so this takes this gets priority, and that's what we ultimately see. Exactly, Gubrick. The code cascades downwards. Yes, it reads from top to bottom. Exactly right. So all other things being equal in the code, if you have two conflicting styles of that nature, then it's going to take the one that's further down in the file. However, there are a couple other things that affect this. One is going to be the priority of the element that's being utilized. So let me explain a bit. So different targets, different aspects of an HTML element have a different priority when it comes to what's chosen for the style that's ultimately used. So here we see that we're styling an HTML element. We're styling directly on the H1 itself. However, HTML elements have a lower priority in terms of styling than classes do. So let's say this. Let me specify a class for the HTML element. Let's call it like header 1. And we're going to style it up here. We're going to make this, let's say, so what's going to happen is, again, we said that all other things being equal, the code that's furthest down will be prioritized. However, classes have a higher priority than HTML elements, for example. So when we go to launch the page, actually, let me plug in my computer here. So here you go, charger. Boom. Okay, so now we're going to launch this page, and we'll see that we should expect for the purple style to take precedence because classes have a higher priority than HTML elements in CSS. And that's exactly what we see. The purple here, because again, the class has a higher priority. There's a few other there's a few other attributes and aspects of CSS, styling and such that ultimately kind of affect what has priority over what. And this is ultimately called CSS specificity. So definitely a very important subject to read upon, CSS specificity. Breaking on the term for a moment, but there's even calculators for it. You can do a specificity calculator, which will there's all these different attributes that you can add to the styling of a CSS element. But again, just the general principle is kind of the important thing to realize. Some things have more priority than others in terms of how you in terms of how they relate to the HTML element and styling and all that. Definitely important thing to cover and all. But with that, there's a few other important aspects of CSS that, well, I mean, kind of detailed and definitely a bit intense for a very, I guess, very beginner-focused intro to web development. But we can take a look at this. So CSS, as we saw, allows you to style the page and such. And so we make it look nice and presentable and looking good. So everything that you see here, like setting the image size here, setting the everything with the button, like the size of it, the color of it, the rounding of the borders, the fact that it has a border, the font color, the fact that when I hover it, it changes background color. All of that is accomplished by CSS. And we're going to see that in at play in a little bit, where we're going to actually apply some of this stuff to build a basic web page. So with that, again, so you can see how like the styling of elements takes place with CSS. So again, like the size, also the positioning on the page, like the fact this is all the way to the left, this is all the way to the right, that's done with CSS. Background color here is done. The fact that this is left aligned instead of like being center aligned or right aligned, or again, too, like how the text is center aligned in this button here, that is all CSS. Again, just everything with the visual aspect of it, really, all CSS. That's easy enough to understand. What CSS also does is it helps us with responsiveness in terms of the web page. So let's take a look at this really quickly. So we're going to get rid of the styling here. Once again, I'm going to change the browser window. In fact, I'm going to, oops, what's happening? Let's do this. In the DevTools, there's actually a neat feature where you can test different screen sizes. Where, like, say you're developing a website and you want it to see how it looks on desktop versus how it looks on mobile versus how it looks on tablets. You can see how a website looks on different screen sizes. So here, this is a, can I like, that's annoying. But here, say we have like a tablet size here. We have that. So we're starting to have issues already, right? This image is so big that the page is horizontally scrolling. Image is so big that the page is horizontally scrolling, which is just kind of not very handy. If you're trying to scroll down and you accidentally go left or right, it's gonna right now hide some of the content, just kind of annoying. If we make it smaller, right, like this content is getting it's like we're making the screen size smaller now, so this might be how it appears on mobile. Again, we still have that horizontal scrolling issue. Text is getting like smaller than we might particularly like. Things are cutting off here, or there's just more horizontal scrolling rather. It's just kind of getting messy. So it would be nice if the text was bigger so that we could actually like read it on the smaller screen size. It'd be nice if everything was center aligned, so that and that these icons weren't like floating over the content and such. It'd be nice for a lot of things to be different here, so that the browsing experience on mobile would just be not distracting, right, and not fighting the user experience. So CSS not only makes the page look nice, but also allows us to make the page responsive to screen size and such. So just kind of look at what happens when we do this. So as we make it smaller, you see how the title is starting to it's starting to do line breaks and such. These elements here, right, they're not getting cut off by the screen so that it would vertically scroll. Instead, they're going onto a new row here. Into with this, like this button here. Instead of the button, again, kind of going off screen, it's actually changing its width. And it's not even getting, it's not even going all the way to the, right, it's not like the button length is going all the way to the edge of the screens, which just look kind of wonky in terms of styling. Instead, it's keeping that distance between the edges of the screen. If you want to look at really, I guess, more extremes examples of this, in terms of like how a website's styling can change in this way, probably look at something like, let's see if YouTube is a good one for that. I feel like it would be. Okay, so if we share my screen now, You want to see YouTube's a really good example because it's like very, very responsive. The layout changes quite a bit with that. That's weird to just create. Hold on. Here we go. Okay. You can see at this larger screen size, these videos are larger here. But if I start playing with the screen size, you can see how it changes quite a bit, right? So at this larger screen size, kind of just normal YouTube. As it gets smaller though, oh, that's weird. Oh, why is it weird? I think it's freaking out. Let me see. Here we go. Right. So as it gets wider or narrower, you can see how the content changes. Right here we have like these 3 videos per here. Then we have this rows of shorts, 3 per column. And we have 2. Then eventually we just have 1, and it's just like 1 big video for each. And we can see that especially once we go to desktop, put me on mobile YouTube, okay? Because it detected the screen size from there. So, right, menus here, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, you can see like the page, it's the same website. It's the same page here, but depending on the size of your screen, well, okay, in theory, at least, the page will change its styling and such. So we saw that too, like the two column with then the 3 column there. So with that, well, I guess it's kind of important too that there's a couple ways that websites will solve this. They'll either use CSS to dynamically alter the page, as we saw. Sometimes they'll also have a different web page for that. Also have a different page depending on screen size. They'll serve a different one. That would work, but I guess not. Anyways, kind of get the point there with that. CSS can be used to make the presentation of the page dynamic dependent on screen size. That's kind of the big thing. Because if your web page works on desktop but doesn't work on mobile, then you're cutting off a huge user base there. I think like, especially for mobile, I think like over 50, I think it's like 56% of internet users are on their phone, or 56% of internet users are accessing it through their phone. Might even be more nowadays. But with that, again, so CSS is about making the page look nice, but it's also about things such as making the page responsive so that it looks good and it behaves and is approachable at different screen sizes as well. Right, exactly. Huge portions of users on the internet are on their phones. So you want to make sure that you can meet every user in a way where your web page showcases viably to them, where it's easily used, easily digestible, easily understood, readily functional, all of that. So CSS plays a very, very big part in that. Lots of other stuff that CSS can do, but I would say those are kind of the 2 main things to know, just jumping into web development, for styling and for responsiveness. So with that, any questions on HTML or CSS thus far? Curious if anyone has anything that comes to mind with that. But I mean, otherwise, we can jump a little bit into JavaScript. JavaScript is nice because HTML and CSS, they're kind of their own like things. But JavaScript is sort of like it's a scripting language. Like it's a bona fide proper programming language, like Python or like C++ or any things of that sort. So yeah, okay. Well, it seems like we can just keep pushing forward. So let's talk a little bit about JavaScript now. We'll share screen. And after JavaScript, we'll also talk a little bit about open source and tool. We'll kind of see how a web page goes together. Well, let me think. Actually, it might be nice to JavaScript and the DOM and JS. Yes. JavaScript. Okay, I was going to say maybe we could build a really basic page super quickly in like HTML and CSS to see how that would work. Because we saw like HTML in theory, we saw CSS in theory. We haven't really seen how they've been applied in like an actual web page. Like there's important stuff with HTML, like anchor tags, like forums and all that such, like all that stuff. And CSS, there's particular things too, like, how do you actually utilize classes? How do you actually, apply stylings in an efficient way? Would you guys be interested right now in seeing like HTML and CSS applied in a more practical way? Or would you be interested in just delving deep into JavaScript? Hello, Tintin. Yes, so we're doing good, having some fun here with web development. We are currently going over basics of front-end web development and just what all that entails. So far we've covered HTML, which is kind of like the content and the structure of a web page. It's the stuff that you want to communicate to your user, said simply. And we also went over CSS, which is like the styling of the content on the page, making sure the page is presentable and that it looks nice and that the user can actually perceive the information in a digestible way, and two, for things such as that kind of extends to like making sure that your page looks good on desktop and mobile and tablets and all sorts of screen sizes and different ways of covering it. We say, how many hours do we have? So we have about an hour left, about 57 minutes. Another 6 hours, maybe one day. That'd be fun. Sadly, I've got a booked weekend. I love talking about this stuff, though. It is pretty interesting to me. What sort of web mobile architecture type? We haven't really gone into that sort of details. Just been talking about the basics of HTML and CSS so far. So, and two, with that Gubrick, I guess that hopefully gives you some context in terms of what you guys might want to see or what might want to focus on. We can do either JavaScript stuff in a bit more detail, or we can do HTML, CSS in detail and just do some bare basics of JavaScript. So what CSS methods? Really just the basics of CSS, like showing that CSS is used to style HTML elements and some of the different ways that you can do that. So you can style HTML elements directly, or you can style them via classes, which can be used on multiple elements. There's also things like IDs that you can use for styling. There's all sorts of different things that you can target for styling elements. And we also talked about some particularities of CSS's functions and features, like CSS specificity for resolving conflicting CSS styles. And we did not use Bootstrap. We've just been talking about pure vanilla HTML, CSS. I'm gonna go over JavaScript. Okay, yeah, we can definitely do that. Any particular aspects of JavaScript? I know you were talking about DOM manipulation. We can definitely do that. Okay, let's see. So pull up my Brave browser again, and we can look at this web page once more. Just share screen. Okay. So let's delve into JavaScript. So again, you can write JavaScript in a JavaScript file in your coding project. But first, we're just going to mess around in the browser's DevTools to kind of see how it works. So JavaScript is ultimately just a programming language. It's a scripting language. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you'd expect from things like Python or like any of those sorts of other scripting programming languages, you can do in JavaScript. So to really go over the basics of JavaScript would kind of be a thing in and of itself, but we can do like logic in JavaScript. So you can see like basic math equation. We can also do if else logic, booleans, conditionals, like with if else, all that sort of stuff. So all that being established, there are particular things that you want to know for JavaScript in terms of utilizing it on the web. So one of those things is you can actually utilize JavaScript to write HTML and CSS. Now, HTML you can use to write CSS in a way. CSS can't really use that to write HTML. JavaScript, though, it kind of gives you full control over those. JavaScript is a lot more powerful of a language than HTML and CSS. In fact, it's come to the point where you can write websites where you have a HTML file, you have a CSS file, you have a JavaScript file. And like in the HTML, you only use HTML. In the CSS, you only use CSS. In the JavaScript, you only use JavaScript. But nowadays, how a lot of it is done is that as the programmer, we'll use only JavaScript to write everything. Now, eventually, the web browser has to have an HTML file to load a web page. Eventually, it has to have a CSS file to load, or not particularly, but oftentimes it'll use a CSS file to have the CSS. But that's like for the browser to worry about. A lot of times people use pure JavaScript just to write everything. There's quite a few reasons as to why. Some of them we won't go over as of right now, but just kind of good to know the full extent of how JavaScript is utilized nowadays. But with that, let's talk a little bit about how JavaScript interfaces with a website. So we were talking about DOM manipulation. So basically in JavaScript, what exactly that means is in short, we have the HTML page here, and we can go into the page and we can kind of identify different aspects of it. So here, like we have this H1, this header here, right? We have this H4 here, another header. We have these divs here. Hopefully we can get to that. That's kind of important. But we can see we have all these different HTML elements here, right? We have this this div here with text. Again, a div is just another HTML element. We have more text here, text here, text here, images, blah, 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 blah. So we have all these different HTML elements. And they exist within HTML. However, JavaScript would very much like to access them so that we can do things to them on the JavaScript side. So that, say, for example, now there's all sorts of things that you could do. Like say we wanted to display the current date. We could write here in HTML, it's just, it's just manually statically added there. So it's just this one particular date. But for example, in JavaScript, we could write it so where the web page will always display the current date or the current time. You can't do that with just pure HTML, static HTML. You need something like JavaScript to do that. And once we have that logic working in JavaScript, we have to be able to affect the HTML element so that it displays that resulting current dates from our logic, right? So we have to interface JavaScript with HTML in some particular way to make this happen. So what JavaScript does is that within it, it keeps a copy of all of the HTML elements. So not the HTML elements themselves, because HTML is HTML, it's not JavaScript. But JavaScript does keep like a parallel copy of all these elements, which you can then use to ultimately affect the HTML element on the page. So the way that we do that is we can go document. So we're targeting like the whole page. Document dot query selector, basically saying that we want to target a particular element. So we're going to target this H1. So you can see that, okay, JavaScript is saying, okay, the H1, here, this main title, that's what we want to target. So now it knows that we're doing that. So with this H1, we can do all sorts of things. We can, again, we can style it in JavaScript. So we can affect the CSS, we can affect the styling of it. We can affect the HTML of it. So we can change the text within it. We can change, like we can add a class to it. We can change all sorts of different HTML attributes, things that we haven't gone over yet, but just know that you kind of have full control over everything. Here, all this ARIA stuff, so we can change like with the accessibility options, all that sort of stuff. We can do anything here. Now, where it kind of becomes interesting is the stuff that we can do with JavaScript as a whole. So like I said, we can write a script to where we can always have it display the current date, for example. So we would have it to where we go, okay, well, we're targeting this, then we put in the code for, blah, 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 make it so that this has the current date always. And it can do that. We can make it to where, say you're making a website where you want someone to like upload multiple files. Like say you want it to make it so they can upload up to 50 multiple files. You don't want to show all of those upload buttons at once. So maybe instead you have it to where it says, you have like just one upload file button, and then you have a button below that that says upload additional file. So you can click that upload additional file and it gives you another upload button. So you can keep clicking that upload additional file button as many times as you want. And it'll keep giving you these different fields where you can upload a file in. So that's where JavaScript really shines in terms of making your website like interactable and all that. Or two, like say if you're filling out you want to take people's information, like in a web form, you can create a button in HTML, and then you can route it with JavaScript to handle the data in all sorts of ways. Like maybe they enter their name, and you use JavaScript to make it so that you that you can store the name and all the information, like the address and everything, in a database, so that like maybe it's an email. Maybe you want to take their email information, so you store their name, their email, their XYZ in a database, and you can call upon that at a later point. Or you can edit that data. You can format their name in a particular way. You can put them on an email list from that database, or you can bring it up to where you can email them like each individual person a set amount of time within a set amount of period, all that sort of stuff. So JavaScript is very, very powerful. I hope that gets the message across, what exactly you can do with it. Does that kind of give an idea of what you guys were looking for in terms of like DOM manipulation and how JavaScript can affect the web page in that way? So again, because with DOM manipulation, again, that's like editing the representations of the web page, of the representations of the HTML elements in JavaScript to then ultimately affect the actual HTML elements on the web page. So again, so like with this document.query selector H1, we could change the color. We can manipulate the DOM in that way. We can change the color, we can change the styling, we can change the HTML, we can change everything you can possibly imagine about it. Very, very powerful stuff. So how long did it take me to get good at web development? That is a good question. Kind of depends on if I am good at web development or not. Some days I feel like I am. Other times you see things where it's like, wow, I still have a lot to learn. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, it's not like, you could say that you started web development and you only made like a 3-line project 10 years ago. And you can say that you've been doing web development for 10 years, right? Technically, I mean, that's not really going to fly. It's not really a time aspect. It's more of a, like, are you making consistent effort starting from a digestible point and continually making progressive effort along the right paths in a way to where eventually you'll find yourself at having a higher skill level, if that makes sense how I put it. So it's really about just starting at the right place, digesting the right content, practicing that content in the right way so that things stick, and so that you actually attain skill instead of just knowledge. Skill and knowledge are very different things. You can't have true knowledge without having true skill. And then from there, so start at the right place, attain the right knowledge, practice correctly, and then just keep doing that. And eventually you'll find yourself at a good skill point. So, I mean, you're not going to be a wizard within 2 weeks, obviously, or within a month, or within 6 months. Really just depends on your goals, how you can, what your goal is, where you want to reach. what resources you have access to, and how much time you put in an efficient way. Okay, so which method, technique, synthetically awesome style sheets or linear style do you recommend using for your cascading style sheets, CSS? I mean, it kind of depends on your project and just the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, which particular things you're trying to accomplish. So you can get by with just vanilla CSS. So people that don't know, there's vanilla CSS as we just saw it, but there's also like kind of solutions built on top of CSS that use CSS as the basis, but that also add additional features and such, like Sass we see here, and less. So it kind of just really depends on the project, what you're trying to accomplish, what your team uses and what they think would be like best for accomplishing things. I know that's kind of a general answer, but that's because it's a general question. I've used Sass before. I've used Less before. I found that they were, I don't know, at the very least, they definitely gave me a different perspective on using CSS, and even taught me things about that I could use in vanilla CSS. There's also stuff like Tailwind. I think we're actually having an event this weekend about utilizing Tailwind in projects. So Tailwind's just another CSS solution that's built on top of CSS. Yes, that is the killer. Sadly, now there is merit in trying different things out because, like, for example, when I was first learning programming, I heard that web development was a good place to start and that it was easy, didn't really require crazy math skills, which I wasn't very strong with at the time, and that you could just get a lot of opportunities with it. So I decided, okay, I'll just learn web development. I won't look into anything else with programming. I'll just learn front-end web development specifically. I won't look into anything else with programming. So I did front-end web development, for like a year or so. Thought it was okay. And I got along with it decently well. Like, I can give this presentation to a viable standard. But I realized that web stuff wasn't really, I don't know. I just didn't really know anything else. So web dev seemed okay. I wasn't too crazy about it. But then I started looking into other things like, well, I don't know. I've been learning like about Arduinos and stuff and programming with, hardware interfaces, all of that stuff. And that was infinitely more interesting to me in the end. In fact, I haven't touched web dev in quite a while. As you probably noticed, I was a little bit rusty on a couple things, like the exact attribute to edit with font weight, or like the term like CSS specificity. So that's because I just learned that web development wasn't really where I was the most interested in programming. Now, I could have stuck with web development over time a little bit more and more and gotten better and better at it, but I just don't really have the interest in it to the point where I would be motivated to be an absolute stellar web developer. However, with this hardware stuff and programming like Arduinos and such, that interests me a lot more. So now that I found the place where I really like in the domain of programming, I can actually like apply myself to the point where I can be, quite skilled in it, and without it feeling like work or without having to fight myself on it. So definitely, so it's weird in that you kind of have to do both. It's good to kind of look around at first, see what's possible, but eventually you're going to have a developed skill set to where you can actually, I'm assuming you want to do tech professionally. You have to get to a point where you have a skill set that's professionally viable, and you can't really arrive at that if you don't focus on a particular domain for a specified amount of time, or more specifically, give quite a large effort into a particular domain. So anyways, I hope that gives some perspective. Yes, exactly. So learning one thing well, then progressing, I think that's actually, so there's a few ways that you could read on this, that you could interpret this. One is that, say you're just focusing on one domain, like I want to learn front-end web development. Get a pretty good basis in HTML first. You don't have to be absolutely amazing at it, but you should be able to mock up like a website, a basic web page with a basic HTML structure, right? You don't want to do like HTML, like first day, don't really understand it. and then you go into CSS. It's just not the correct way to do things. You have to have enough of a foundation in the prerequisite concepts before you go on and learn the new concepts. So exactly, you don't have to be a master at it. You just have to have a decent enough understanding to then move on. So that's one way to interpret this statement, like learn one thing well and then progress. The other is that if you actually do learn one domain really well, like say you have a pretty good grasp on web development, or for example, like say you have a really good grasp on CSS as a whole, then you could use something like Sass or Less, right? Another CSS of kind of an expansion on CSS. Then you can learn how to do that really well. Because CSS is so intimately like connected to these two. Or two, like me, like I, even more disparate example, a more farther removed example. Oops, let me do not that one, but here. I learned web development to a pretty decent level. And since I understood web development to that deeper level, it really clarified to me just how much I wasn't super crazy about it. But with that, it's not like I had to throw it all away. I learned quite a few things from web development. One is just that in my daily life, I know how to manipulate the web and web pages to get information or get content that otherwise would be a lot more difficult or I just didn't know how to do before. So that's certainly helpful. But two, like with learning JavaScript and everything, it taught me the basics of programming so that, when I went on to like the Arduino stuff, for example, I wasn't lost. It wasn't like a complete reset. I understood how programming worked, and I understood how to get solutions in it and how the fundamental concepts function. So super, super easy for me to dive into like the hardware side of things, even though it's like a complete contrast from web stuff. So which projects would be good for a portfolio as a front-end developer? So I actually do recruiting for a nonprofit for our web development department. And just from my experience, from what I've seen, we've had hundreds of applications. Everyone is trying to get a position. Everyone's trying to get an internship. The things that stick out are actual websites that function in the real world. I've seen a million demos and like front-end mentor projects that people have done, but we don't really, like at least in my charity, like we don't really need that. We don't need to see that you can mock up a website like in theory, or like a really basic like one-page website in theory. We need to see like an actual website that works and that is designed not just to get a website out there, or not just to get a website designed, but that's designed in order to actually be used, if that makes sense. So I kind of regret that, and that my first really, really big portfolio project was like a Pokemon Pokedex, and where you could just look at the different Pokemon and such. The coding was, actually, pretty decent, all things considered, but it didn't really matter because the ultimate function of the website was just kind of useless. Like no one needs a Pokedex website, like a run-of-the-mill one. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did a really good UI and everything for it. Relatively, it actually wasn't UI that you would see on an actual website, which definitely harmed it in a really big way. So like my website, the coding was pretty decent, and it had like a slick design and everything, but it wasn't set up like an actual website that an actual person would use, and it wasn't an actual website that an actual person would use. And if that's the case, like at least for my charity and stuff, just doing recruiting for that, like I wouldn't put any stock in a project like that for me personally. I just, especially for people that are like beginner coders and developers, like you need to show that you have practical skills, in my opinion, more than anything, or that you have the ability to show something practical. So yeah, it's kind of funny because I before I got into this charity, I just did like the cool projects that weren't really practical, that didn't really have anything to do with like using the web as an actual user. I just kind of did these flashy one-off projects. Then I kind of realized just how like non-valuable they were. Don't get me wrong, I did learn a lot from doing them, but I would have set myself up for success a lot sooner if I would have just killed two birds with one stone, where I made my portfolio projects also be like websites that people could actually utilize. and that we're actually live on the web and being used by people. So very, very big, important thing there. Okay, we got quite a few more questions. Let's see. We are going to cover open source, how it interfaces with web development. But you guys do have quite a few good questions, so I want to go through those and make sure that those are addressed. So let's see. How much math is needed for coding? It really depends on the domain of coding and your interests. And again, presuming you want to do this professionally, depends on the job that you get hired for and what your company needs. Front-end web development. So my kind of personal story with that, if this gives you any perspective, well, I probably don't have to go into too much detail, but I was horrible at math. I never paid attention in school to math. I wouldn't even say that I forgot everything. I just never learned it in the first place. I was able to coast through school and like everything except for math because like it was kind of a skill that built. So I don't want to say out of spite, but just kind of to show math who's boss, I never learned it properly. I actively didn't learn it. So even the most basic algebra and even basic like arithmetic stuff, like manipulating fractions and everything, I just never really learned how to do that. Even with all of that being said, I was able to do front-end web development perfectly fine, even having those, even like with my lack of even basic math skills. There were times where it certainly helped to kind of brush off my math rustiness. Like there's times where I had to set up proportional relationships between two different HTML elements, where it's like, for example, if this thing gets larger, then I need the second thing to get larger in proportion to the first. Or I had one to where if you scrolled the web page down, there was this element on the page that would rotate. And so I wanted it to where at the very top, have the rotation of the element be 0. At the very bottom, have the rotation of the element be 360 degrees. Or, effectively just going all the way back to 0 again, but making the full rotation. So I had to use some very basic algebra to set up that relationship to where, okay, well, for example, maybe I can set this up. To present, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. In fact, let me pull up that project actually, because it'll make a lot more sense once you actually see it. So this is what I'm just talking about in terms of I made a decent website, but it was just not practical at the end of the day. But again, I learned some nice things about it, and I utilized some basic math that you can see. So here's the website here. So I have this Pokeball thing here in the background, where when I scroll this, okay, it's going kind of crazy now. I'll have to look at the code again. But usually it's only supposed to go like 2 or 3 full rotations. Oh, I think it's because it's in mobile. Let me try this. There we go. Yeah, I think it's because it's based on screen size. I don't know. Kind of freaking out a little bit. But basically the idea behind the code was that, yeah, and then you can see there's quite a few different things here. We can actually, let's look at this really quickly in terms of the technologies that we went over today. So you can see that for the HTML, right, I have, let's see. So these are all like HTML elements that we haven't covered yet, but you can kind of see like over here when I'm hovering over it, right, here's some text in the HTML. Here's more text. Here's an image that was eventually added, an image, more text, more text, more text. You can see these HTML elements that structure the content, some of them that give context to the content as well. So here, let me come back to this math aspect just in a second. But yeah, so that's the HTML of it. And then you can see, ooh, let's try taking the CSS away from this, because it is going to look like an absolute mess, I'm guessing. You see, this is very, very CSS heavy, right? The CSS is very, very important for this to work. But if we take that away, we do. Oh my gosh, look at that. There's a list of Pokemon. And then, wow, you don't even see everything else. Really? That's kind of crazy. There we go. And there's still some JavaScript active. So this is why when I press this button, that's why everything changes, because JavaScript has that interactivity. And I have like I kind of have something set up in JavaScript where it's kind of not a database proper, but it has like the information for all these different names in these different languages. And then to this functionality where I can type in and I can start to filter it. Oh, okay, that's actually, you'd have to have like the full CSS and everything to be able to see that. But I can also like filter it and everything. So anyways, you can see how like those different tools that we've gone over, how this works. So again, like with the JavaScript and everything, I can type in and it does DOM manipulation to take away elements here. So that's how this all comes together on an actual website. Now I'll get back to the math thing in a second, just because there's a lot more questions. And it'll be quick, but let's get back to it. So find the area of tech that you love the most. Yes, like I realize that I just don't really care about the internet. I just don't want to spend my professional life on the internet and with internet technologies. I just don't find it interesting. I find the natural world a lot more interesting. So that's why I've like moved away from web development. I only learned that about myself though by doing stuff with web development for a while and then going on to try other things. Learning web dev to get a job and build your ideas. Yes. So like I said, and just in my recruitment experience and such, and with others that I've talked to and other resources that I've read, do full projects, but make them practical, actual web pages. Like don't do what I have here. This is kind of nice and cool, but it's a little toy. Business isn't going to care about this. How much CSS is efficient? Well, I guess as much as you need to create the page as you need it to be. And no use in using more than that, because otherwise that'd be redundant. I hope that answers your question, right? How long does it take to be able to contribute to open source? So we'll actually talk about that in just a few minutes. It really just depends on the extent of your open source contribution. Like you can make very, very basic ones. You can even start today and make very, very basic contributions where, or you can make like really big contributions that take quite a long time to develop and that you might have to learn some skills for. Okay. Yes, definitely something valuable you always want to work on. Oh, the Pokedex. Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, it was nice. Again, though, I don't recommend doing something like this. And yes, that stuff is pretty cute. Can I paste that command in the chat? Yes. So I'll paste the commands for getting rid of the CSS styling. Let me find it again. Console. So it is going to be this command. Okay. What are the web mobile development norms, ISO, and the standards from organizations that are doing website development project? To be honest, I am not sure of those, since I haven't gone that deeply into web development to the point where I was able to start developing websites and such to like the different standards that you expect of a web page. That's you'd expect of like a professional level web page. I know W3C, EMCA, ECMA, I guess you could say. I have heard those things before. I'm sure there's lots of different opinions and perspectives on it. It's definitely something you want to delve into online. Share the Pokemon site. Yeah. So this one actually is on live online. I could actually kill the domain of this. That's not really a useful portfolio project, unfortunately. Well, I have used it in a couple interviews where I actually did get some interviews with this project. But what ultimately came down to is that when I had to demonstrate the skills of putting up like an actual website, I just kind of faltered because this was a really big work for me, this website here. actually is quite a bit going on underneath the surface, like at least for the skill level that I was at the time. But yeah, again, it would have just done me a lot better. I did get some opportunities with it, at least some. Oh, I didn't get the opportunities, but the door opened for me to potentially get an opportunity with it. But again, if I could go back in time, I'd just do a different project. If I was still like interested in web dev and all. Let's see, how to adapt the HTML project to app code program in order to display it with different web browser. I guess, could you clarify what you mean by HTML project app code? Do you mean like the browser dev tools? Because at least in this is the Brave browser, but it looks like it uses the Chrome dev tools. I don't know if those are. I'd assume. I don't know if Brave is built off of Chrome, or if the Chrome dev tool is just available for anyone to utilize in their own personal web browser. That I'm not too sure of. Framework scheme, like in terms of they have a good curriculum for learning for learning web development. Brave is Chrome based. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why the dev tools are, why they work so fluidly with it. But okay, that's kind of that. I mean, if you guys have any more questions, please throw them at me. I think for this ending section, we can definitely delve into open source in context of web development. So, sorry, I still don't understand your question. That's the same. I think that was the same phrasing as before. Of all open source. Yeah, I think I used FreeCodeCamp before. I would say just like take notes, make sure that you. So I used it when I was very first learning, and I think I went around it. I think I went about it in not particularly the best way. Don't just breeze through. I mean, you can breeze through all the lessons. It's really easy to do that, but definitely don't do that. Make sure that you take notes on things that you can refer to. Make sure that you reference the notes from like the previous day, the previous 2 days before you start again, and make sure that you're actually make sure that you're practicing by making your own little websites with everything that you learn. And by website, I mean even just like, just putting an H1, a paragraph tag, and maybe like building a very, very basic form, maybe even less than that. Just practice making websites. You're not going to learn by just following the curriculum and taking notes on it. You have to actually do stuff too. Web development is a skill. It's not something to just read about at the end of the day. My socials, I don't really do social media, truth be told. I was, man, just doing web development and everything just made me so sick of it all. And two, I mean, I have personal opinions on social media also. Kind of makes me not really go on them. Not really a big fan of it. Part of the reason why I don't really want to do web development, because I don't really resonate with the internet all too much at the end of the day. But anywho, I mean, do you guys feel satisfied with that in terms of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, going over some of those basics there? If there's anything else we can, I stay in real life. Yeah, I try to. It's ain't nothing wrong with going on social media, using the internet as a tool and all that, but it's too easy for me to fall into the internet rabbit hole. So I try to distance myself from it when I can. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything else on HTML, CSS, JavaScript you guys want to go over, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to send you all some resources that'll be helpful for open source web development. So this is the open source event. We definitely want to talk a little bit about open source. And I have some, actually one more thing. We were talking about the math before. Just wanted to give a very quick example of like how I've utilized math in front-end web development. This is a really basic, you can do some crazy stuff if you really want to. Like I remember seeing this one fintech startup that had like all these particle effects on the homepage where there's all these different like elements all these different particles just like floating around, and it used this like sort of mathematical formula. I forget exactly what it was. It was like on TikTok. The guy originally found it, which is just kind of funny. But from using that, he's able to create this really cool front end presentation that was, I guess, pretty efficient. However, they went about incorporating it. So in terms of the math stuff, again, just a really, really basic example of this that I utilized at least was I said, okay, well, I want the top of the, I think I took the height of like where all these names were here. I want the, and then I took like the, so I took the height of this, and there we go. So now it's rotating normally. What does it give? Like gives a full rotation, right? So I said anywhere along, so let's say I have 360 for the value of the Pokeball spinning. And eventually I wanted to go from 0 all the way to 360 again, right? I want to access everything within that range, right? 1, 2, 360. And I want the value of where this 360 is at any one point to equal the height of, what do I want to say? The value of, how would I articulate it? I basically wanted to match these things here. Right, so value of scroll. So I would say scroll bar position over the overall scroll bar height. Right? So in fact, we could say, let's just put that as like scroll bar position, scroll bar height. So whatever the scroll, so you can't, now in the program, in JavaScript, I could get the value for the scroll bar position. In JavaScript, I could get the value of the scroll bar height. But in JavaScript, I could not get the value directly of the Pokeball rotation because that's something that I'm inventing. I'm inventing the rotation. JavaScript doesn't know how to get it directly. And I invented this 360 as well. I implemented that myself. I mean, not that I invented the concept of 360 for radius or whatever you call it, but I said, okay, since this is a circle and we're going to rotate it in a full rotation, we're going to call its maximum 360. I'm going to call this value here what we're trying to solve for this at any one point. So ultimately, what you can do is how do you get it so where I can get the value of this x at any one point? Because this x is ultimately going to be the value that we put here at this point. Well, you can just multiply both sides by 360. And you'll eventually, then from that, you'll get your value of x, which is going to serve as the current rotation of serve as the current position of the scroll bar at any one point. So this is how I implemented it mathematically. Again, pretty basic math. I think this was the most complex thing I've had to do, and the most complex thing I've had to do so far in terms of math, in terms of like my front-end web development and such. Though I have been taking a Java course recently where being really fluid and fluent in my math has made things, I can make so much more elegant solutions to things that is actually like a completely different world. It's actually insane. So at the very least, I would recommend people, like if you don't have the craziest math skills right now, I would say you should still brush up on your math if you have the time to do that. Like even just basic arithmetic concepts and learning them to like a more developed degree has helped me a lot with just being able to create efficient code and the like. So anyways, a good public profile is necessary to get into MLH. I don't know. How could I say it? I mean, if you don't have a public profile, you can't necessarily have a bad one, right? What is the code program in HTML file in order to be displayed, read, run, despite the different web browser default? I don't, if I'm understanding you, so what about the HTML file? What information in it allows it to be run by different web browsers? That I don't really know. That's not stuff that you're going to be dealing with as a front-end web developer exactly. That is stuff that's going to be handled by the web browser. And there's probably some metadata within an HTML file behind the scenes that I've never seen or have ever learned about. But I think for most front-end applications, you don't really have to know about that stuff. So interesting question, but ultimately that's not something you really have to worry about, thankfully. It gives you one less thing to worry about. Oh, okay. So I see what you're saying now, I think. So yeah, you can't just start writing like, H1 tag, P tag in your HTML files. Usually you have to have some metadata within it as well. Like here, we can see in this HTML file, I have all this, additional information. So I'm telling the web browser this is an HTML file, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to break this down for you guys because you can just like read about this yourself. I think that a different resource would be a bit more appropriate and do a much better job of explaining it. But you can just search up on Google like HTML boilerplate and you can get something that looks like this. Or you can also have Emmet installed like I have in my code editor. And it has this available by default. And that kind of just gets me going. So again, this all has a function that is very useful to read about. But at this point, I'm just not going to cover it. We're going to adapting use API libraries during lifecycle development process for an app. As in third-party APIs, in terms of, I think that depends on your application. That depends on what you're building exactly. If you want to utilize APIs during so the question is like, why would you, for a particular project, why would you want to utilize an API? Like what of a particular API? You don't want to use APIs, just use APIs, right? An API is a solution that allows you to accomplish something. So truth be told, I don't know too much on APIs. I've used some third-party APIs, like with that Pokedex website that I showed you guys. I use something called Poke API, which just has all the Pokemon information that you can snag and easily utilize. So like I didn't hand code all of that Pokemon information. Instead, I took it from a third party, from an outside data source, which is set up to easily utilize and access that information. That's kind of a big thing about web development too with JavaScript, is using it's like interfacing with the web in that way, being able to take data from outside sources and being able to manipulate it, so on and so forth. But we only have about 10 minutes left, and I did want to go over some open source stuff really quickly. I think I'll just start with sharing some open source resources with you all, because again, those resources can explain it quite a bit better than me. And two, they'll actually show you like how that you can it'll show you how to actively contribute to open source web development with steps and everything. And it'll also give you different open source projects that you could possibly contribute to as well. So let me go over a few of these with you all. So let me show my... So one of these is a site called... Oops, not that. Why did you not copy? Let me see. These are a few sites that I found and that I've utilized at times to get more comfortable with open source overall. One is a site called First Timers Only. So friendly open source projects should have specific issues for newbies, which is kind of what it's all about. It's for finding open source projects that have issues that would be good for beginners in open source. So I hope you can see it. Oh, here, let me share my screen. Here we go. So this one here, first timers only. Kind of walks you through. So it has these different resources. First contributions, walks you through contributions workflow on GitHub. Then Up for Grabs is a site that has projects that you can contribute to. And Good First Issue is another site that, again, kind of shows you issues that you can contribute to. There's a few other resources on here. So this is definitely a good first place. I'm going to drop this link in the chat for you all. First timers only. Again, this is a good resource for learning how to get started with open source and web development. And I have some other resources. I mean, I think that website is like just a fantastic place just to start. Like that's just honestly, I could just end it at that. You all can go on to read about there and kind of contribute with things, learn how to contribute, learn how open source works, learn how the workflow with GitHub and everything, forking, pull requests, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, if there's any other questions on open source, though, I mean, please definitely let me know. We can even walk through some of these resources together really quickly if you want. Like, let's do that. So we have first contributions. So it says if you've never contributed to open source project before, explore these resources. First contributions is a tutorial. If you scroll down, so this is also stuff I went over in my intro to open source and data science presentation I gave a couple days ago. But it's very much the same principles. You fork the repository, clone it, create a branch, make your changes, push those to GitHub, and then work to implement your changes back into the original repository, into the original code base. So let's see. What is the code program to add an HTML file in order to become a responsive website adapted with different screen sizes? That is going to be, so there are aspects of HTML that you want to utilize with that. Like there's your picture element and your size elements, which will, well, okay. So the main thing for responsiveness is actually going to be with your CSS. You want to look into media queries. So if we go media queries, responsive CSS. Responsive web design, media queries. What is that website that, is it like responsive.dev maybe? There's a site that's actually super, super good. Web.dev here. This site actually has super, super solid introduction to all sorts of things with web dev. I love this website. It's probably the best I've ever found when it comes to just a one-stop resource for learning modern web development principles. So yeah, this will give you some insight on the web design basics. So yeah, primarily it's going to be your CSS. However, you are going to have aspects in your HTML. Like they probably have the picture element here. Oh, they don't? Okay. Picture size HTML, which is like image stuff. It helps with serving images in a more responsive way. But that's stuff that you'll come across eventually. Definitely just focus on the things that are in this basics at first. So with that, you have to know the code base rule. Yes, that's with any open source project really too. You can't just waltz to a project willy-nilly and start doing things just because you want to help. You have to actually be able to develop solutions that will be useful for the code base. And to be able to do that, you have to have some fluency in the code base to some degree. But I mean, there's the open source contributions, there's a whole spectrum of how involved they are. Some of them can be just, maybe you notice a typo in the documentation of the project. You can have your first contribution just being fixing that typo. It can be as simple as that, all the way up to, you know, developing, programming major features for the website and implementing them from there. So there's a whole wide range of possibilities when it comes to tasks that you can accomplish when contributing to open source project. for web scraping page. That I'm not too sure. That sounds more like JavaScript if you want to do, because again, like HTML and CSS, they don't really have that sort of functionality in them. Web scraping would be definitely more so JavaScript, or even like third-party software, or like not, or like, you know, non-web software even. There's a program that I found that pulls all of the assets from a page or from a website. So you can pull the HTML file, you can pull all the images with the file structure and everything. It's not a perfect way to, that works really well if you have a site that's just like pure HTML and CSS and JavaScript. But if you have a site that's like being implemented like off of a server or anything like that, then it doesn't really give you all too many, doesn't really give you the resources to have a one-one scrape of the website. Oh, nice. Yeah, good stuff. Contributing to open source. There we go. Yeah, it's really nice doing open source stuff. So you're actually helping a community of people and the like. Also, from what I understand, recruiters love open source stuff. As long, again, you have to do something valuable. You can't just show up into, I mean, you know, changing a typo on a documentation definitely helps, but you can't do that for 5 different code bases, just changing a single typo, and then waltz to an interview and thinking that'll get you, thinking that'll give you a high quality or a high possibility of getting an amazing job. You actually have to like do things that will provide value in a real world way, and ideally, you know, to the project itself as well. So, but yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit. You know, we went over basics of HTML, basics of CSS, basics of JavaScript as applied to the web, as well as we covered a little bit with open source stuff, at least where you guys can get started with open source. And we just discussed a lot of things around web development and around learning programming. So I think this was a pretty nice stream overall. Enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoyed it too. So with that, I figure we just open it up to, we have a couple minutes left. If there's any final questions. Yes. Okay, cool. Glad you guys got something out of it. If there's any other questions, we have just a couple minutes left. If there's any last minute questions, throw them my way. Otherwise, we're gonna have to hop off and get on to the next event. Give it about a minute or so before we bring things to a close. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sticking around and for contributing to the discussion, asking good questions, and for your comments. I appreciate it. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, we can bring things to a close here. Let's get this stuff going. Thank you guys for attending, and enjoy the next event.